Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back to the Talk of the League podcast, brought to you by the weekly Armchair Sports Talk. Obviously, it's myself and Reece, Spider-Man, next to me tonight, talking to Wayne. We've been raring to get you on for weeks, Wayne, and very much looking forward to this one. We'll be talking about sort of obviously your history, a little bit about United, and of course, your latest book. On Wayne Rooney. So the title of the book, obviously, Wayne Rooney, Teenage Kicks, the street footballer who ruled the world. I wanted to discuss your history, obviously your motivations, and just a little bit more about this particular book in particular. And we'll try not to share any spoilers, so apologies for that, and just a spoiler warning for you just in case that happens. I hope everyone's well in the comments. Get your comments in. We want to get some questions out there and ask Wayne some important questions that hopefully you'll be able to give us a bit of a rendition with. So obviously your background with regards to writing. I know I looked recently that this is like around your 21st book, I believe, and obviously you've done lots about football and other things as well, and obviously particularly not United's histories, Fergie's fledglings, that sort of thing, which is all incredible stuff. You've also written about George Best, David Beckham, Gordon Hill, some of all real-time greats, obviously. And but how do you choose your subject? How do you sort of come up with the subject or the person that you want to write about next, and then run away with it?
Well, back in the day, it was very much the process of. So, for example, the first book that I wrote, I was doing an interview with Brian Greenough, and he had done a book. So I asked him if he wanted to do one. I had a website at the time, very similar to the one that I'm running now, but I had just got it off the ground, and a few former United players were helping me out with that. Youth team players, Kevin Pilkington, Ben Thornley, a couple of the lads from the class of '92, and I thought, wouldn't it be good to do a book about these lads and basically tell the story of United's youth system through these stories of the players who didn't necessarily make it in the first team. And it just so happened at that time that Fergie announced his retirement while I was in the middle of writing it, so I knew that it could be a complete story. So I did it from like sort of day one to the last day and managed to cover everything in between. And then from there, the books that I wrote were basically the Gordon Hill one came about because I worked with Brian, and Gordon helped with that. You know, he did an introduction. I interviewed him to talk about Brian, and the other books kind of like followed that pattern for a little while. I did a book on, well, me and Brian were actually going to do a book on the 74-75 season where United were in Division 2. The reason why Brian wanted to connect with all his old teammates, but he died before we started writing it. And it was parked for a long time. But I say a long time, a few months. And then I sort of talked about it with his sons and said, look, Brian really wanted to do this book, and what about if we did it in sort of tribute to him? And so Tommy Docherty and Martin Buchan really helped out with that, but a lot of the players did as well. So that kind of thing got snowballed really, and I started writing books, and I was lucky enough to get them published. Obviously, first of all, because the players were of the profile that people would want to publish their books, and I was lucky that as a consequence of me working with them, publishers were taking notice of what I was doing, which was really good. And obviously, I benefited from that, what those players did for me, and I'll never ever forget that. But then I've got a really good, close network of friends who will always suggest good ideas. One in particular, Dan, it's his birthday today, so hi Dan, happy birthday. He's really good. He's got like a list of about 50 ideas that he wants me to do, and it always depends on the timing of them. For example, the George Best one, he literally messaged me to tell me that he thought I should do it. And a subject like George Best is a tricky one because it doesn't matter how often you've written anything, that because he's such a precious subject in United history, if you're going to write a book on George Best and you want to have it published, you've got to make sure that A, you're doing something that's emotionally sensitive, B, that you're adding something relevant to the library, because obviously everything's been written about George. You've got to be adding something new. So that's basically like a roundabout idea of how those ideas come about now. And now, basically, because of where I am and how many books I've written and how many other ideas have come up in the meantime, I've got like a to-do list that's gonna. I mean, there's no guarantee I'll ever get published. I'm not taking that for granted at all. But if I'm lucky enough to continue to get published, I've probably got a to-do list that's probably 6 or 7 years long. Do you know what I mean? People keep suggesting stuff to me all the time. Oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And it might be one that's already on the slate, or it might be one that I'm thinking there's just no way I could fit that in. And sometimes that happens as well. But we all lucky as United fans that the history of this club is so rich that you can go off on tangents with all kinds of different things. I was kind of lucky in a way that the 70s hadn't really been documented in any great. Andy Mitten did a great book with some of the players of the 70s, and also there's a great book called Doc's Devils as well, which is really thick, but it's hard to find. But the story, the way that I wanted to tell it, and the things that I thought that I could add, that didn't exist. So I was very lucky to do that. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer to that. But that's where I am now. I've got all this like sort of backlog of stuff that I can do. I'm very fortunate to have that, and obviously working with you guys as well to sort of tell some of these stories on live podcasts as well.
Can I just ask you on the back of that question, because you mentioned, I think, probably the most difficult conversation to discuss, and that is George Best. I think personally, he's such a great icon of our club and obviously a great icon of football, but there's many people who don't want to discuss him because of what happened later in life, and that's not something I think you should ever comment about, because that is none of our business. What happened with what happened with him personally? Like, obviously, he passed away in 2005. He had like severe illnesses and all that, which affected him his own personal life, which is completely unfair. That happens in society. It's a pressure from what many believe, and I think it's true. The very first ever football superstar was George Best. He wasn't christened the fifth Beatle for nothing. Like, he had that aura. In terms of writing about a specific player or writing about a period of history, how do you differentiate? Because if you had to choose with George Best, purely for me, like, I know for yourself, because you're a fantastic writer. I mean, I've read a vast majority of your books. I know how fantastic a writer you are. You differentiate really well. Do you just completely disregard certain parts of the personal aspect because you would rather, if that got mentioned, it could have because obviously with certain areas it could be like a black marking. I know yourself that's not something you do, but do you think that's something that most writers may actually get wrong, is black marking, because they bring up information that realistically shouldn't? And how do you differentiate so you avoid that?
Yeah, it's very.
I know it's a bit of a long-worded question. Sorry.
No. It's a great question actually, and obviously it's only really on a tangent associated to football, because really it's the process of writing. Now the thing, obviously going back to the George thing, was what could I add different, because there has been, like you said, there's been a lot written about George, and obviously a lot of it is the controversial stuff, and people want to read the controversial stuff, and they want to go down that route. So when I was looking at what I could do, because I'm not really one who goes down the controversy. I mean, if controversy is there, I don't avoid it, and if like a big story comes up, there was a big story in the George Best book about how he actually left United, and I thought, well, I could tell that obviously because I had that information. So you can't avoid the controversy when it comes along. But George's wish was, his dying wish was, I hope that people remember me for my football. And I thought, well, why don't I just write a book that celebrates the footballer? Go back, strip it down. And no one had really done that. And because everyone wants to tie. I mean, if you read any number of books, almost from page one, they're tying everything into the drinking. It's an inevitable slope from that. And I thought, well, there are different ways to go about that, different storytelling devices you can use. You can celebrate.
It says all the people don't know.
Yeah.
It says all the people don't really know about George Best as a footballer, because for older fans, obviously I'm the youngest fan here, but I still pay attention to United's history. And George Best, even when he was at the club, and you can testify this, George Best didn't drink at the club. Like, you would have like the odd thing, like a shandy as it was back then. That was common, but it was purely that was culture. Like, he had a shandy at the club. It was afterwards when it got peak. Like, he had like the odd night. Like, obviously he's peaking 66 up to like 68, 69. Like, he's peak. He was going out with Summerby, but that's because of who he was. But he was never he's an alcoholic at that point. Oh, he's madly addicted to drinking. He was just being himself. He was just having fun. So I think it's crazy that people don't know the culture, and I think that's what I like about the fact that you said I just want to focus more on the football.
Yeah, no, you're right, and people demonize him as a character because of obviously there was some controversial things that he did. He wasn't the best dad to Callum, and he wasn't the best husband to Angie, so you can't avoid those kind of things. But I did always try and stay on the football narrative in the book, and even then, even when the unavoidable conflicts came where you have to address the drinking, I did very cautiously describe it as an illness and tried to paint that all this stuff that happened. I'm sure you've all seen the clips of him being on Wogan and stuff like that. I've tried to paint that in the societal perspective at the time. You had the fact that they were glamorizing it. I mean, for years after George died, before Wogan died, you would have the 50 things that shouldn't happen to a TV presenter. And they'd always show that clip. And it was like, no, you set that guy up with the drink and it was an illness. And you really shouldn't have been doing that. And obviously attitudes have changed now, because if that kind of thing happened now and you got a known alcoholic on, you'd be cancelled as a host because you'd be horrific what you did to that person. So it was all about sort of reframing that in a way and painting him as this person that did need help and he was ill, and we didn't for a decade as a culture. I mean, alcoholism as a term was only really defined in either the late 60s or the early 70s. It wasn't something that people thought about until, I mean, in George's case, it was too late. But you can't avoid things like that when he's a personality that's so big. But when I set out to write the book, because it was so heavily focused on wanting to do it about the football, they became a subplot, so to speak. You don't avoid it, but it's not what the book's about. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And thank you for that answer. Honestly, that I know Mark's got a fair few questions to ask you tonight. I know I've got a fair few questions of my own, but I think the fact that you purely mentioned how you write in particular, which honestly, guys, if you want a good example of read this. Honestly, I've read it twice. Like it's a phenomenal book. Differentiation about how you write, and obviously the importance of. Like, for example, there's a question in the chat, which we'll bring up in a minute from Heather, is about she's not a football fan. It's purely how do you get motivated by writing? Like, we'll bring that up for you in just a moment. It's not like I think a determination of a great writer is how they differentiate a topic. And you always see, like, for some writers, it's obvious for them, like, the immediate thing they go to is, I want to go for the easiest way I'm going to sell a book. It's the controversy, it's the clicks, it's what's the best way to get a response. Whereas for me, a good writer is a good writer that can differentiate a controversial topic, but can also give them something to not just remember them as a person, but remember them in the next generation for the generations that did not see that. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that's missed in a good writer these days. Whereas for yourself, 21 books is evident that it's consistently good writing and differentiation.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, and great description there. Thanks for that answer, Wayne. Absolutely wonderful. Heather makes a really good comment here. Not a huge football fan, but a big fan of books and would love to write one day. How do you stay motivated when writing?
This is a bit of a cop-out because I am a football fan and what I do write about is football. Again, because I'm writing full-time and obviously we do the website and the podcast and everything like that, I'm always able to move from one. If I've got writing block, I can move from one subject to another very, very easily. And because it's always generally about United history, then if I'm stuck on something like that, if I'm working with a player on their autobiography, I can go to that project. I'm very, very spoiled and lucky in that I'm able to do stuff like that, because I know very early on in the first couple of 2 or 3 years when I was writing, and I didn't have the luxury of like 6 or 7 projects that I could be working on, and I was working on 1 or 2. It wasn't always easy to move from one project to another, and I'd be stuck on that. And that, that's a natural thing as a writer. The hardest thing, and this is again general writing advice, the hardest thing is to, once you've started, persist with it and actually persist through that first period of like, I'm not going to do anything with this. Once you break through that and you carry on, and once you've completed your first thing, whatever it is, even if it's 500 words, if it's 10,000 words, if it's 50,000 words, which is basically a short novel, then once you've completed that in itself is such a milestone achievement that you begin to think you can basically write anything. And now, like my George Best book was 150,000 words and I could have just carried on. So, you know what I mean? It becomes its own addiction in a way, which is
I'm the
It's the
same. I
best.
don't write it. I type. I'm the same. Like I do it just like a hobby. I like doing creative stuff, like art, like painting, drawing. Obviously, you've seen it myself, like editing, like through my phone and my laptop. I do all that, but I do like do a bit of creative writing. But for me, and I think this is an interesting one, is I couldn't get into football writing, and it's not because I don't love football. It's that I think it's such a hard niche because there's so many good writers already in football, like from not just from a journalistic point of view, but just writing in general. That
And I think you could
you
probably
could write
get
something, but you get eclipsed. Yeah,
you could
and I
get
just thought
so
it'd be crazy.
emotionally attached as well. You know, us as football fans, we really get involved and so you know, too involved at times, and I think it's very difficult to then delineate your love for a particular team and then being able to write about a particular team. Do you know what I mean? Without getting carried away or sounding too positive, if you see what I'm saying.
That's
Yeah, Paddy
I write about David Beckham.
No, but yeah, look, I wrote a book about Eric Cantona, which is basically like my love letter to football because Cantona was my favourite player growing up. But you're absolutely right. How do you? And I don't know because that's the challenge that I face every time I start writing a book. Is like, is this going to be received in the same way? And yeah, look, you guys have been very kind. Like everyone generally reads my books is very kind with what they say about it, but it's still a difficult process. Like when you start it, there's no guarantee how that book's going to be received. Have I been able to remove myself too much? Have I poured a little bit too much love in this? Am I not showing objectivity? Am I talking about Cantona as if he was the best player ever when I know that he isn't? But for me, for 5 or 6 years, he might as well have been. So you have to really be careful the line that you're telling on because, like thousands of people were just like me. You would have seen Cantona as the best ever. Cantona tops all-time player polls. I think he did the one that was at the turn of the century topped, and George Best and Bobby Charlton had played for us, and Duncan Edwards. So you've got to be really. Obviously, it's very careful process that you go through with stuff like that, and it's always a process I'm very aware of. Every time I'm writing, you've got to be very objective. I don't want to be like, I know people now say Gary Neville's gone too far the other way, where he's been too critical of United, but I can understand the difficulty that he's in because when you've got to try and show objectivity at the same, because otherwise it removes all credibility from what you're saying. Carragher, there's a reason why when you've got Neville and Carragher on their shows, it's Neville who always gets the clips. It's Neville's name who always comes first. It's because Neville's showing objectivity. Micah Richards is a great co-pundit, but I can't imagine that he'll ever be the lead because he's not objective enough. He's there to throw punchlines at United in the same way that Carragher is. And I'm not, they're both very good pundits, and I'll listen to them talk. But Neville is the headline because he's more objective, and that's the kind of the line that you've got to take.
I think you're absolutely
so
right.
So what for you is more proud? Sorry, I know, Mark. I know you were going to. I just wanted to ask this last question before I shut for a little while. For yourself as a writer, Wayne, what is your proudest? Like, what would you say is the most proudest thing about being a writer? Is it the fact that you get to build a network with who you're working with because it gives you more to write about, or is it just the sense of once you finish a book? It's not the element of you don't know where the book's going to be successful or not, but you've actually got to get something that you've always wanted to write about, out there. Because common thing with size, not everything is successful, but in our own mind, it's, I've done something great. Like for example, George Best, like the book's like 150,000 words. Not many people in a state of journalism or just writing could match, let alone 100,000, because there's so much to do. So for yourself, in terms of writing, what to you is the proudest thing?
Well, you're right. First of all, in what you're saying there, if I've written 21 books, then one is the most successful, and then there's a sliding scale. There's definitely a least successful, and so on and so on. I've been lucky enough to work with one of my heroes. He's not associated with football. He's one of my musical heroes, and we were having a conversation about praise, basically, and he just basically said praise and criticism are the same thing. Really, it's just someone else's opinion, and if you allow one thing to come in, then you've got to allow the other thing to come in. So basically, you've got to be like Teflon and just refuse both of it, and well, not refuse, accept it for what it is, and then move on from it, because obviously praise can be too much. And I know it brings on to the part about what the proudest thing is, because then obviously one thing being successful is great, obviously that's a career point of view, but the other thing is the indulgence. So like now 20 books is possibly 150, 200 people in United history that I've talked to, that I've been, and I'm a fan first and foremost. So I've had the indulgence to talk to these people. I've been able, very, very fortunate, to say, like, for example, I've had lunch a few times with Martin Edwards. I can talk about the morning that I had sat with Alex Ferguson talking about Jimmy Murphy. Do you know what I mean? That's an experience that's in my life that I can talk to my nephews about, my kids about, when I'm lucky enough to have them. So all those kind of things. Like now, for example, I worked with Raphael and Fabio last year, and they sent, when my nephew was playing his first game of football, they sent video messages congratulating him, and saying, well done, keep it up, and stuff like that. Brilliant. They're the actual things, like, obviously, because they're not the things that I can always show publicly. Some of them I put on my Instagram.
That must be incredibly rewarding when you get that. I bet that's amazing.
So last year we did the film True Genius, which was based on the George Best book. And my nephew watched that, and he fell in love with George Best. And he was only 6 then. So this was his first football player. He watched that film and he's like, wow, George really came back and showed them, didn't he? And I'm like, yeah, he did. Like, so he just went nuts on George Best for ages. At the time, I was working with Sammy McElroy, and obviously Sammy had played with George. He knew him very well. So a couple of times that I've met up with Sammy to work, I'd take my nephew with me just for a moment. Then my wife would take him shopping or something, take him away while I was working. But he'd get to talk to, and remember, he's only 6 or 7, so he's having conversations with someone who's like George Best's. On Sammy's debut, George Best set him up to score his first goal. Do you know what I mean? So he can say, "Oh, you played with George Best," that kind of thing. Those little kind of things. He's had a kick around with Gordon Hill. Do you know what I mean? So he's so spoiled and so lucky with that, but he'll be able to have those memories forever now. He's attached to the club in a way that I wish that I had been when I was growing up. And that's the thing that, not just that as well, the fact that, the book on Jimmy Murphy, the book on George Best, the book I've been writing on Duncan Edwards, those have all been sort of blessed or authorized by those players or people's families. If you can write a book about Jimmy Murphy, who was the most important man in United history, and his family are authorizing it, there isn't an honor that's greater than that. That's the thing, that it doesn't matter it really didn't matter if it sold one copy or if one person liked it and everyone else hated it. It's the thing that I've got that's sentimentally important to me. So those are the things, really. Don't get me wrong, the reviews and people being kind about my work is, honestly, it's the best thing, because people are so generous and so very kind. And every time I log into Twitter and someone's being nice, saying, "Oh, you wrote this, I recommend this book," and that it means so much to me that I can't even articulate. But these are the other things that I'm talking about to you guys that aren't associated with the writing process or marketing a book. They're the memories that you keep and the relationships that you have. I know Gordon Hill now is he's a family friend for life. Brian Greenough was until he passed away. There are loads of people like that I've been lucky enough to sort of work with, and now I know them as friends, and that's just mad to me, because again, I keep saying I'm just a fan, lucky enough. I've got this massive indulgence to be able, even Reece, like talking football on a Friday night with Phil Marsh and Lee Lawrence. That's mad to me. We get to do that for like an hour or two. It's absolutely crazy, and it's just great to talk about United with people who have been in that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's incredible.
And it's honourable. It's an honourable privilege. Over you, Mark.
So question here from Victoria's Secrets. Do you find it difficult to be impartial when you're writing about the club you support? And I know you briefly touched on this earlier. You might have missed this, but if you could answer that, it'd be fab.
Yeah, no, it's a great question again. I'll answer it a different way, because obviously I did touch on that earlier. The impartiality, right? So writing a book about United in the 70s and 80s when you want to talk about Tommy Docherty's team being the best and why they could have won a league title and all that sort of stuff. But then you have to realise Liverpool were the best. They had their best team ever at that same time, and so did Aston Villa, and so did Nottingham Forest. And you have to be respectful of that as well. You can't just say, oh, well, if United had got a goalkeeper, they would have won the league every season for 50 years in a row, because football's cyclical. It's not realistic. You have to be realistic and say, I loved everyone that I've worked with in Tommy Docherty's team, and then have to still say, well, they probably couldn't have won it. They probably needed 2 or 3 more players, not just a goalkeeper. You have to be a bit more realistic about that. It's a little bit difficult sometimes when it's what I grew up watching. Like there are things like the 2009-10 season, if and when I come around to writing about that at some point, and I'm still annoyed about Drogba's offside goal, and can I be really impartial about the fact that even though Chelsea were brilliant, they scored loads of goals that season and probably deserved to win that league. But little things like that, can you be really impartial about writing about Liverpool in '92 when the players and the fans were taking the mick out of Ryan Giggs and ripping on photographs in front of his face? You've got to, or even like I was interviewing someone the other day who played against United in the early '90s and really resented them winning, and saying, really saying resentful things about them. And, you have to, it's not just the writing of the book. You have to be objective in the interviews. You've still got to be diplomatic and think, oh, you're a Liverpool fan saying loads of critical things about United, and I've still got to try and be professional to you. So you've got all those kind of conversations.
It'd be the same thing if it was it would be the same if it was like a Man United fan being asked about Liverpool in the 70s and 80s. I don't think you could name any United fan that could honestly go, yeah, what a good team, very good team, yeah, totally like them.
Exactly. And the closest you get is like this. It's like a reverse argument that you start saying, well, the game was a bit backwards back then. You could pass back to the goalkeeper and kill the game, and they were a bad football team, and they were anti-football. Those kind of like soul things that you do. You got to have a little bit of fun with that. I always like try and have a little bit of fun with Arsenal whenever I'm writing, if it's new stuff, because I like winding up Arsenal fans if they ever read anything that I write. Not that
we all do.
It's so beautiful. Yeah. It's so beautiful. Wind up Arsenal fans. It's so creative.
Struggling to at the moment, though, aren't we? But
you got to keep our dignity about us at the moment. But that's that.
Great answer. Vicky in comments, great to have you here. Just quickly before we ask this question, very quickly, Paul mentioned earlier, don't forget to smash that like button. Absolutely important to us, so please do. And if you aren't subscribe. So Vicky asks, did you ever get starstruck at all? Obviously meeting all these wonderful ex-players and family and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely you do. It's a bit weird, and I know if Lee and Phil are watching this, they'll probably think that I'm being a bit stupid, but it's more with players that I grew up watching, because obviously like Gordon Hill, he played for United before I was born, and I do, don't get me wrong, it's not like I don't get starstruck around them. I get nervous and anxious when I first met them and stuff like that, and first talked to them, and it took me a little while to get around that. After a while, it's not something you ever take for granted, but it just becomes part of your normal daily life. I definitely, without doubt, got starstruck meeting Sir Alex. It took me a long time to sort of be. I've been gone from the meeting for 7 hours before I got used to like, I talked to Sir Alex this morning. Do you know what I mean? Like, you see you coming down from it because you don't really know how to react in the moment. We gave me a well done, son, and I was talking to someone the other day and saying, he gave me a well done, son, and that happened 6 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's still that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, there are obvious, but yeah, the people that I grew up with watching, and the people that I, like the twins, for example, Raphael and Fabio, like working with them for a couple of years is just, I was definitely starstruck for the first 3 or 4 months, but because they were really nice, they just sort of like eased away. And because the process is a process and you're working and you're asking them questions, the second that you start asking questions and they're answering them seriously, it sounds really stupid because you are talking to them as a fan. I'm definitely a fan, and I'm never not a fan, but it becomes work. It's still work in a weird way. As much as it is an indulgence, it is still work, and you've got a job to be doing. So even interviewing Fergie, I've still got to like look at my question sheet and got to be not just looking at what I'm asking, but also if he's answering in a certain way, I've got to be ready to counteract it. If he's got something there, I think I should jump in and ask him. You've got to. It sounds really stupid and
It's not
clinical.
always straightforward and scripted, I suppose. You have to be ready,
You've
obviously,
got
for
yeah.
a
But
response.
if you want to be a good interviewer, that's basically the first thing that any. I mean, I don't know if there's a school for interviewing, but one of the first things they would say is don't stick to what's exactly there. You've got to read the interview as it's happening, and I'm pretty good at that now. I'm pretty good. Basically, like being a United fan and knowing so much about its history means that you can jump in and ask questions because it's like, oh, what about this? Let me ask, because it wasn't something that I was thinking about, but now you've mentioned it. What do you make of that certain situation? Things like that. So you've always got to be switched on, no matter how starstruck you get, and you do. Like it never gets old. Like even meeting Sammy now, like I've been meeting him, or known him for 10 years, spent maybe 70 hours with him last year talking about his book, maybe even longer than that. And now, still, when I see him, he's still Sammy McElroy, who played 400 times for United and scored in an FA Cup final. Do you know what I mean? So, and I never want those feelings to go anyway because they're all our heroes.
Absolutely. So obviously, as we alluded to earlier at the beginning of the show, you'd written about George Best, David Beckham, Gordon Hill, to name a few. Is there anybody in particular that you haven't written about yet that you would love to at some point?
I always joke and say that I want to write a book about every United player that ever lived for us because if I could, I'd just do it. That's just the indulgence side of it, like showing off. But I mean, yeah,
Definitely.
I was talking about Dan earlier, who told me to do the book on Best, and he's told me to do a few actually. Like because of the nature of what they are, I can't say everything that because I can't say every project that I want to work on because
don't want to spoil it.
I want to do every book, but one thing I can say is because it's been drummed in that many times is that one thing that is on my slate that I can publicly talk about is that I really want to do a book on Brian Robson, and it will be there in the next 2 or 3 years. That would be fantastic. It's not like on the immediate thing, and I've got like a few bigger ideas as well. Like obviously I'm doing the on the Talk of the Devils YouTube channel. We're doing the complete history of United with Paddy Barclay, and I'd like to
fantastic shows by the big guys. I highly recommend it.
But I want to do something on that scale as well. So there are a lot of different things like that. But yeah, Robson is definitely one because I mean, he wrote his own book, but sometimes it's like biographies and autobiographies. People in autobiographies, they tend to, and Robbo's definitely one of those. He talks with a lot of humility, and sometimes you want everyone to glorify him, don't you? And that's one thing that's missing about Robbo is that.
I know obviously you're doing the series with Paddy, and I watch them every week, and I think they're absolutely brilliant. Has anyone ever recommended for you to write about like Dennis Violet, for example?
Well, that's an interesting one because there are. Remember, it's not only me who writes books on United, and
yeah,
got to be very
so
careful.
many,
there are some great
Roy
books.
Cavanagh, I know him. He's the only other writer I mainly know. It's like you two are the ones I mainly focus on. Is yourself and
Roy wrote one on Dennis. Do you know what I mean? And you've got to respect that work sometimes, and
absolutely.
You don't want to revisit. Like for example, Roy wrote a book. He co-wrote a book on Duncan Edwards. So when the opportunity when his family basically said that they wanted a book writing on Duncan. And I was like asked about it. I was like, "Oh, I've got to talk to Roy about it." And Roy was very, very nice. And we had because I know Roy very well. He only lives a few miles from me, so we see each other regularly anyway. So I had a long conversation with him about it, saying that I don't want to upset you if I do this, but there is a lot of new information about him. And I do want to, if someone, especially if Duncan Edwards' family, like say, we want you to write this book, then what am I going to do? I'm never going to say no to that because it would be mental to do that. So
obviously that's important. I totally understand that.
You know what I mean? All those kind of things are in the mixing pot. So can you add something new? Is it going to disrespect what someone else has done? Is there anything is there any reservation that you've got writing? Like for example, I don't think I would do something on Busby because all the great Busby books are so totemic in United history. Paddy's obviously done the definitive one. Eamon Dunphy's done a great one, and Busby did some himself. And there are others out there. I don't think I'd touch Busby because because
Yeah.
he's been covered so well, and I don't think that could add anything. And it is really a case of looking at that individual subject, like a Dennis Violet, and knowing that Roy's done such a good job on it that I
Yeah.
probably
I
wouldn't.
just wanted to ask purely because of that factor, because obviously there has been so much work done. Like, I don't think I've seen any to date, but I've always been intrigued. I wanted to read about Franco Farrell. I know he wasn't here at the club long,
Yeah,
but obviously recently departed. I haven't seen much written about him, so I thought maybe like as another mention. I don't know, but there's so many greats. Obviously, yourself, you've written. You want to write about Robson, which is a fantastic mention. Obviously, from that era as well, you've got Stapleton as well. Obviously, you're close in contact with Gordon Hill. Like there's so many great players to write about or discuss. But like you said, obviously, it's not just yourself that's writing. You got like Dumfries, you've got Roy Cavana. Fantastic work. It's so difficult to just pick one because obviously new information is important, but like yourself, you never know. They might get asked as well. It's so
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. So, obviously, as I said at the beginning of the show, and what this show is all about, your newest book, Wayne Rooney, Teenage Kicks, the street footballer who ruled the world. My question on that is, why Wayne, and why now?
Well, I was writing this book on Duncan Edwards, and then Wayne Rooney retired. Rooney's a very weird subject. I mean, it's funny that we're talking about Dan actually again to refer to the my friend whose birthday is today, because he plays a big part in this. Because the book's actually dedicated to him for this reason. Way back when Rooney did his first transfer request, I wrote basically a blog about it on a blog that I was writing on at the time, and it got picked up by CNN, so it went mini viral at the time. You know, Rory McIlroy was tweeting me about it and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, getting some attention, and that basically did balloon my profile for a little bit, for 4 or 5 months. But the blog that I was writing on weren't comfortable with that, so I sort of moved on and did my own thing, which is when I'm talking about the likes of Kevin Pilkington and Lee Lawrence and all those lads sort of came on and they helped with that, and that's like going over 10 years ago. So the Rooney thing really sort of kickstarted my professional writing career, because I had nowhere else to go, and I was only writing for fun at that time. And then it became a little bit more serious because I set up a website and I'm like, I've got to do something with it. And I wasn't ever going to do that. But
No turning back now.
Exactly, right. I was like, I'm doing it. I've got to write. People were now wanting me to write stuff. They were wanting to read my opinion on United. So I thought, oh well, I'll keep. Again, it's cathartic for me, and people wanted to read it, so I'm going to keep writing. I wasn't going to do it, but Dan was supporting me in that period. It was a couple of months period where I wasn't sure, but he was really sort of like saying, "No, I'll support you. I'll help you," and everything like that. And then, so basically all that time, from that, the Rooney thing, it really kickstarted that. And then a few months later, obviously, he signed a new contract. He's playing for United. We scored the overhead kick in the derby. I was actually, because at the time I didn't have a season ticket, so I was standing in different places in the stadium whenever I got a ticket. And on this particular day, I was on the exact same row as Dan in the K stand, but right at the other end. And we went bananas when the goal was scored, but I just like sort of turned around and Dan was like, me and him were like the only two calm people in the stadium. Not calm as like, Rooney scored a good goal, but kind of like transfixed by what had just happened. Like, in disbelief, like people either go nuts or they're like, oh, wow. And he's stuck a little bit. So, and then obviously we've always been friends anyway, blah, blah, blah. But then a few years later, when he did the second transfer request and he was at, is it Swansea on the opening day, David Moyes' first season, and he came off the bench. I think he set up the last goal, but when everyone was celebrating, Rooney walked off by himself. Dan was at Swansea and he took a picture of it. That picture went viral all over, like the press. You probably remember it if you saw it, because Rooney's so distinctive walking away by himself. So we always had like this little link of like Rooney, even though I don't think he was either of our favourite players. But then over time, and I'm writing about football and I'm writing my books and everything, and this character study of Rooney's played out in the press, and has he ever reached his potential, that kind of thing? Was he as good as he could have been? How much did his diet let him down? Should he have been on a par with Ronaldo? And and Messi, and he's broken the goal scoring record for England and United, and could he have done more? All those kind of things that were like little contradictions made him such a fascinating character study that not even when he retired, when he left United, I thought, well, I'm definitely going to write a book about Rooney someday. So all the scrapbook, I started collecting scrapbooks, programs, all the newspaper columns and everything like that, everything that I could about Rooney in a book, in a scrapbook, on documents on my computer, knowing that one day I'm going to write a book about him. And then he retired, and my agent just said, do you think that you're ready to write a book about him? I said, well, as it happens, yes. And I sent him just pictures of all my documents, like all these like folders and newspapers and stuff. He said, all right, okay, we'll do that then. And that's literally why I wanted to do it, and why it happened when it did, and also why obviously I wanted to mention Dan because he was so heavily influential and supportive in that period, and it has like this emotional significance. I was also, I was there when he made his debut for United. I was with my brother, we watched that, and it was like, you watch it and it's like, oh my God, what have we just watched? Do you know that debut? Are you watching basically the biggest career that you've ever seen at United? Because you never expect someone would score an hat-trick on the Champions League debut. Do you know what I mean? So, and especially after Euro 2004, that was his first game after that. And it's like, literally, you were thinking, we could be watching the best player of all time here, just take his baby steps into football. And yeah, that's the thing I tried to convey in the book as well, Mark, is that he has this emotional resonance that people always remember a lot of the moments about Rooney.
Absolutely, great stuff. And I've noticed the other week you did a post on your Twitter page, a little thread about Rooney and obviously the impact that he's had on Derby at the moment. Do you think? Now I know it's obviously too early to tell. Reece and I discuss this all the time. We're obviously excited to see how well he does. But do you think that that there is a potential for that to happen? And do you think that maybe that could happen and he will flourish into the manager that he looks like he could be?
You mean at United or in general?
In general and at United, ultimately, yes.
In general, so the things that we look at a United manager at the moment, and I'll use United because we all support United. The things we look at are, can they get a good style of play going, all that sort of stuff. But Rooney seems to possess, and you've seen it with Derby, he possesses the other side of it, right? The players definitely play for him. They're fighting all the time for him. So he knows how to instill that. And we don't know if any manager's been able to do that at United for 4 or 5 years. So we know that it's a difficult thing to implement because it's not something you can take for granted. The early Mourinho teams did it at Porto and Chelsea. Did they do it at United? We're not sure if they did. But we know that Rooney seems to have that quality about him. So, and that's a very difficult thing to implement and manifest because we've seen how difficult it is at United. It's not just a case of saying they're the biggest club, you want to play for them, run through a brick wall. You need to have managers who inspire that from you, and even Solskjaer couldn't do that. Even though I still believe they played for him, but they didn't do what these Derby players are doing for Rooney. So he's got that side of him. Now, can he play good football? We've seen little glimpses of it because they've scored a couple of good goals. But can he do that on a consistent basis? That's something that we're going to learn about in the future. So we're learning these kind of things. He's got these qualities that we weren't sure if he would have. We definitely know that he's got some qualities about him as a manager, and also a lot of integrity. First of all, for persevering with the Derby job in the situation that he has, and turning down Everton in the situation that he did. Whether or not long term that'll be as a United manager or as even a football manager, I don't know. One thing, and I'm sure, Mark, you're probably going to come to this at some point, but one thing I know about, one thing I'm certain or sold on is that he's going to have a massive influence in the future of the game. He's going to have one of the most significant impacts in the future of British football. I don't know if that's going to be as a manager, if it's going to be as another role in the authority or anything like that. You know what I mean? He's just going to be an influential figure in the way that the game changes. The one person that I've mentioned a lot in reference to Rooney is not a manager, is Jimmy Hill. And everyone talks about what a pioneer he was for change for like 20 or 30 years. Rooney will have that kind of impact, but we don't know where it will be or in what manner it will be. I'd like to think that he'll do something that completely flips the switch on what people think about him. Because a lot of people, let's be fair about it, they're quite disrespectful about his intelligence. So I'd love to see him come up with a brand of football that really flips that on his head. And it looks like he could. It looks like he could do that. But yeah, it's the thing. Quincy Amarikwa said, played with him in the MLS. He talks a lot about the work that Rooney was doing, going head to head with the MLS, trying to pioneer change on that front, and he's still not even retired. So those kind of things make me think that from the authority point of view, from the way of improving the game, it could be just as well. I still think he'll be as significant. And really, I don't know, is it better to football if he's not a manager, if he does implement himself in that way, or is it better for the club that he's a manager? It's an interesting one, but I'm absolutely certain he'll be one of the biggest names moving forward in terms of how the game will be shaped in the next sort of 20 or 30 years.
I think what he's done, though, in the sense, and speaking of Wayne Rooney, like Owen's literally a massive Wayne Rooney fanboy, let alone a Man United fan. Wayne Rooney's his all-time favourite player, like, honestly. Although he did forget him in a quiz once, which was really funny. There is one significant thing, though, that I think summed up your entire point there effortlessly in terms of, like, to nobody that understands football, the way you just described it is complete perfection, is change. And I think he's done the one thing that Frank Lampard couldn't. He's actually adapted from what he learned as a manager. Lampard said, he took ideals from when he played at City under Pellegrini. He learned from, obviously, Carlo Ancelotti, Jose Mourinho. He says all this, but no disrespect to Lampard, but when you watch them at Derby, when you watch them at Chelsea, when you still watch them now briefly at Everton if you watch their games, I have yet to see anything, and this is no disrespect to Lampard, but I've yet to see anything concrete that says he's listened. Whereas I look at Rooney, he says, I learned briefly from David Moyes. I learned, obviously, from Ronald Koeman at Everton. I learned from Louis van Gaal, who he called the best tactical coach he ever had, and to this day, he still stands by that point. He learned from Sir Alex Ferguson. He went to the MLS. I look at each manager in tangible effort, like the tactical side. I think he's nailed Van Gaal down to a T. The way he sets up is the pure possession factor. Sir Alex Ferguson, in terms of handling the press, we already know he could do that anyway, but he's had the Sir Alex Ferguson approach to it. He's completely owning the environment.
Yeah.
And obviously, and then from David Moyes, he's had I think David Moyes out of the three had more of the siege mentality because David Moyes had the harder job, keeping Everton in a position where they could aim to be better than what they were. And I think he's added all three aspects better than what Lampard's done. That's no criticism to Lampard. It's very difficult. But in a short space of time, Wayne Rooney's adapted from those managers that he's heralded so much. And he's added to his game. And it's no reflection that he's got a good chance of keeping Derby up.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, very good point. And you're absolutely right, hit the nail on the head. I think he certainly has that drive. Derby is probably other than United, the biggest challenge in English football at the moment, and he's ready to take that on board, and he's doing a phenomenal job, as you say. He's got the players playing for him, and if he can instill and develop his own identity, he could flourish into a wonderful manager indeed. Great stuff. So I sort of looked at a few bits of the book. I have started reading it myself, but I noticed you say near the end of the book, few players in history have been as evocative as Wayne Rooney. So I just wanted to touch on a little bit and ask why you think that is. What do you think he means to the fans, and how is it that he's become such a massive part in the club's recent history?
It's a weird thing. I think, first of all, because he could have been any one of us, right? He's a lad from a working class area, probably lower than working class in a way. So you immediately take into your hearts the way that he came across as like pillared by the press a little bit because he came across like a little bit shy, not very well spoken, like a bit of a deer in the headlights when he was first there. And when you saw how good he was as a footballer, there was a little bit of the Gascoigne about him. So because he had a little bit of the Gascoigne about him, the nation sort of took him under their wing a little bit, and they loved him. Right at the start, they loved him. And then they did what they normally do, and they turned on him. And then when they turned on him, and the things that he did, let's be frank about it, they weren't likable things that he did. It made him very easy to be demonized, and also because he's very ambitious, and he was quite clear about this from an early day. Even like at Everton, knew that he had to be ambitious to leave Everton and move to United. He'd sort of developed like this, like an inner resilience to deal with this kind of conflict, because that's one of the biggest things that you can do is leave a Scouse club to go to United, and request that you want to do that. And also he'd been demanding to do that for nearly a year, as you'll know from the bookmark. He'd been planting that seed for a long time. He'd been wanting to go. And then the Newcastle thing came out, and he was like, no, he was very clear he wanted to go to United, however that was going to happen. So, and obviously then the Everton stuff came out, they were painting Judas on the wall and all that sort of stuff. And he went back to Goodison and they were nasty to him. And then he did the transfer request and then turned United fans against him twice and all that sort of stuff. So, and then obviously the England 2010, where he said, nice to see your own fans booing you. So you had a player who was quite happy living in conflict, even with the team that he was at. Even for England, for United, he was quite happy with that. So he was evocative in that way for a start. First of all, because you couldn't help but love him because of how good he was as a player and because of his natural naivety, let's say. And it made you want to sort of warm to him because he had that naivety and because he was rough around the edges. And you've got to warm to that kind of personality. So first of all, you loved him. And then he did the thing that made you not like him very much. And then generally, I mean, everyone's had this because at England, obviously, they disliked him, but he still went on to score the most goals for England at this time. So you've got to cheer his goals. You've got to say, oh, well, Rooney's still doing well for us. And then for United, he puts in a transfer request, and then 4 months later, he scores the best goal that you've ever seen at Old Trafford. What are you going to do? And then he inspires us to the title. I still know a lot of people who insist that they wouldn't celebrate Rooney's goals. So I don't know what they were doing on that day. Maybe they were stunned in silence like I was and used that as an excuse to not celebrate. But I don't know how you could not celebrate what he was doing after that.
Personally, as a non-English Man United fan, seeing England fans celebrate his goals after they've slated him, I couldn't help but just laugh. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't help but laugh because it's funny watching hypocrites get caught, like proper hypocrites.
Football makes hypocrites of us all, though, and we were all in that same boat.
That's what I love about
we were as United fans, and then when he went back to Everton after they called him Judas all the time, they were welcoming United's best ever goal scorer back, and oh god, they love it. And then he scored from the halfway line for them, and they absolutely loved it.
That's what makes football fun. That's what makes football to us. Like we are proud hypocrites, and we love to be hypocritical. We love it.
And then he goes to MLS and he does that. Is it Orlando where he tracks back and he obviously scored from the halfway line, but where he tracks back on the halfway line and wins ball.
Is that 80-yard run?
Yeah, because all those fans immediately loved him because they're like, we've never seen someone, especially someone like Rooney, who didn't need to do it, make that kind of effort because it showed them. It's the kind of thing that shows you what could be possible if you tried hard enough. That no game is lost, no cause is lost if you try hard enough, and that's what he was doing in that situation. And all of a sudden, all those players for the DC United were kind of thinking, if Rooney's doing that, we all have to do it. So it changes a mindset. It's evocative from the ground up, really, and that's why I described him as such, because I can't remember another player who transcended it like that in a good and a bad way. You know what I mean? The way that you're forced to sort of confront that, because even when Cantona jumped into the stand, we were all loving him for it. We were like, there was no demonizing from the United fans. There were a couple of people in the immediate thing, like I think Paddy Crerand might have been, not Crerand, I think Crerand defended him, but there was someone like maybe Tommy Docherty had come out and said, oh, he should never play for United again. And then a couple of days later, Docherty's changed his tune and saying, oh, he should play for United again. But apart from that, Cantona was universally accepted and everyone was saying, oh, that was great that he kicked the fan. People didn't accept Rooney's transgressions in the same way. Even United fans were getting a little bit sick of, oh, another infidelity rumour coming out and stuff like that. He's unlikable at the end. Oh, why give him a new contract when we could have moved him on? All that sort of stuff. He polarised fans. And that's what makes him such an intriguing character study to write a book on.
I think he's you spoke about like Cantona there. I'm going to use another French example, but never played for our club tragically. In terms of good and the bad, Zinedine Zidane. I think in a way, in a football sense, I'm not going to compare Rooney to Zidane because it's elegance versus sheer determination, sheer brilliance.
Tenacity.
You can't compare. And tenacity as well. But Zidane, to be fair, if you listen to Roy Keane, he also called him, quote unquote, a nasty bastard. He's done that. But he had that elegance to the game. But I think if you actually think about good and the bad, inspiring football fans to become more invested in the technical side, the art of what football can be as an art form versus headbutting a guy in a Champions League game against Hamburg, headbutting Materazzi in the World Cup final and walking past the trophy, infamous moment. I think in a fair comparison, good and the bad, maybe you can compare Wayne Rooney to Zinedine Zidane in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not so much in the way that, I mean, even when he left Juventus, I don't think the Juventus fans hated him. I just think there's this weird love-hate thing with Rooney wherever he went, apart from DC, where obviously everyone loved him, but certainly Everton and United, we were forced to sort of deal with conflicting opinions about Wayne Rooney. And
Fantastic stuff. A really great answer that was. I enjoyed listening to that, so thank you so much. Interesting comment here by Victoria's Secrets again. Do you think Wayne Rooney fulfilled his potential? Personally, I don't think so. Now, I know this is up for debate a lot. I have had conversations, even with United fans, that don't really rate Rooney as highly as I would. But I look at it subjectively in the fact that he was United's all-time top scorer. He's currently England's top scorer. And he won absolutely everything, and he was a wonderful player. And you hit the nail on the head again in the fact that he did some really negative things that put him into the limelight negatively, but always seemed to claw himself back. And I think that takes a certain type of person, and the fact that he achieved what he did whilst going through that rigmarole of negativity and then back up to the high again. That surely that means to me personally that he was a wonderful player and certainly filled his potential. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the riddle, because there's sort of like, we go back to the contradictions of being a football fan. If you say he fulfilled his potential, and you mentioned there the all-time greatest goal scorer for England and United, so reframe the argument. If he's the greatest goal scorer in England and United history, does that make him the greatest player in United history? No, it doesn't, because we're going to put other players in front of him. So has he fulfilled his potential in that regard? Well, in a way he did, because he's beaten records that nobody else could. But did we still expect more of him? Could he have done more? There are different aspects to that as well, because you've got first of all, the trajectory against Ronaldo and Messi, which is possibly a little bit unfair, possibly fair, because from Rooney's admission, his diet wasn't anywhere near the same, and you needed that kind of application. He accepted that very early on. So if you don't have that kind of application, you're not going to have that professional endurance, which those two players have got, because they're still playing to different standards at the highest level at the moment. And Rooney's been retired for a year now, and he wasn't at the highest level when he retired. So those kind of things play into it. There's also the other aspect of when Ronaldo left, what became of Rooney and how he stood to that responsibility, and how there was a period that is reflected in the book, just when he got injured against Bayern Munich, where he was scoring all the goals. He was playing as the number 9 in the classic 4-3-3. More or less, it was a 4-3-3 with Valencia and Nani on the wings, where people were describing him as a potential Ballon d'Or winner if he did not got injured. So if he did not got injured, then let's say United win the Champions League that season. If they win the league as well, which would be the 4th consecutive one, which they could have done if Rooney had stayed fit. You don't know. So that plays into this. If he'd have got one Ballon d'Or, would you have been saying that he's fulfilled his potential? It's a very, very tricky thing, and like you said, Mark, it's subjective, because that's what makes the story of Rooney so great. I personally, going back to it, I look at it and I think he didn't do what we expected, but what he achieved was enough. The other way of looking at this, I know it's a long-winded way of answering. Bobby Charlton won 3 league titles for United, or 3 or 4 league titles for United, right?
Yeah.
David Beckham had matched that before the turn of the century. He'd matched what Bobby Charlton had achieved before the year 2000.
Right.
Does that
Yeah.
automatically make him a better? It's such a complex argument,
No.
and you see where I'm going down with this argument, because then
we have this conversation a lot actually. Stats and accolades really don't tell the full story, do they? And
you've got
it's
to
difficult.
judge everything on its merits.
It's fundamental, because I think the best way to determine this point if Rooney filled his potential is then you flip into a different question about two different players, and then you really test a person's, not really test them to the point you're trying to exploit what they're up here, but it's testing their point of view. And I think the best way to determine that is who was a better captain. Was it Brian Robson or was it Roy Keane? Because then you see a person's point of view, and then you'll be like, okay, so as Wayne Rooney, you can then use that as a marker saying, well, did Rooney actually fulfill his potential? Is he Man United's greatest player of all time? Though I think if you were to say Brian Robson over Roy Keane, you're going to say Rooney wasn't the greatest Man United player, because you're going to say somebody pre that time. You're going to say Duncan Edwards. You're going to say George Best. You're going to say Sir Bobby Charlton. Whereas if you say Roy Keane, you're going to more likely say Wayne Rooney is, in fact, our greatest player for what he did afterwards in that respect. So I always think that's probably the best question to then determine possibility, because two great captains, two different eras. One dragged United through a very dark period where we were constantly unlucky, either with trophies or form or consistency, or the fact that, whether we like to admit it or not, between 1977 and 1990, the best team in English First Division at the time was unfortunately Liverpool. They were the best team in English football for that 13-year period, despite what Forest achieved, despite what Villa, Spurs, even Everton, like that great Everton team in 1985, like that happened. United at the time, it was more or less about entertainment in periods, like the great 3-0 win over Barcelona in 1981. It wasn't about the trophies, it was about redemption from the 2-0 defeat in Barcelona. Like that's important. You've got the two FA Cup finals under Ron Atkinson, 83 and 85 as well. Like, it's subjective, but that's Brian Robson dragging us with a very good team. It was just consistency. Whereas Roy Keane had the greatest Man United manager of all time, the greatest football manager of all time as well, and you had a brilliant team. That's not marking down Roy Keane at all. That's not marking him down. But I think people are more likely to choose Brian Robson because of look what he had to go through compared to Roy Keane. It was so different from era to era, and I think that's why I would use that question to go. So who's Man United's greatest player then? Is it Wayne Rooney? If not, why? And then that's why I always use that argument.
Yeah. No, it's a great one. And he's definitely in that conversation. For sure.
Yeah. Lots of comments coming in here, guys. Just want to say thank you very much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful show so far. We've got a few more questions left, I can assure you. Trevor here is saying Rooney reached the top. He's always played on the edge, which is what made him special. Rooney, Victoria's Secrets again, Rooney had the trait that a lot of top players have, a nasty streak. I feel that, not that you want players to have a nasty streak, but I feel that that's something United are probably lacking at the moment. Someone to really get involved and be in the nitty gritty, and we're missing exactly players, not necessarily the ability, but with the tenacity and that nitty gritty that you require. And I think that's a big story. Yeah, exactly. A big reason why.
Our last major trophy, Wayne Rooney was our captain, and that was in Stockholm in 2017. Him, Carrick, Fellaini. Yeah, you might mug them off for not being the best players of all time. Carrick, very underrated. Fellaini was an absolute shithouse, but he knew what he was asked to do. And I'll admit at times I criticised Fellaini for being the right player, but in times he delivered when it mattered. Wayne Rooney as well, phenomenal warrior and all that. And it's circumstance that we haven't. It's baffling that we have not won a trophy in 5 years, and those three players were key to that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Some other comments here. If another player had half the another player was half the player Rooney was, they would be considered world class. Probably not too wrong there either.
Yeah.
Great comments. Great comments, guys. As I said, please keep them coming in. We'd love to read some more out. My next question for you is about obviously our current youth system. United over the years. A number of years have always been proud of the youth system. Obviously, Rooney didn't come through that, but he came at a very young age. But obviously, we have a lot of younger players that are consistently coming through, the likes of Elanga at the moment, obviously, who Ralph particularly likes. We can see a lot of positives from him. But is it, as someone that knows how players can develop and become so influential and era-defining, do you see any Rooneys emerging through the youth currently?
Well, I like McNeil. I like Garnacho, obviously. There are a couple of, again, I don't want to dodge the question, but it's better to answer it comprehensively, right? So, obviously you've got players of natural ability in that youth cup team. You can see who they are. They're obvious because of the difference that they're making. Annabelle, we all want to see him play in the first team and see what he can do as well.
Can't wait for that, yeah.
But there are two ways of looking at that. The first is how that player breaks into the side. Rashford is a great example, particularly because of what he's going through now. When he broke in, we have to remember that there were two injuries in front of him. There was the injury, I think it was the first team player who was out, and then Martial was out as well. So Rashford was sort of thrown into the first team, and he played those games that he did, and he took to the ground running. But he wasn't an obvious player who was breaking through the reserve team at that time. He was called up in an emergency. So, much the same as Gary Neville. When Gary Neville broke through, everyone was tipping him to be a centre half. But his chance in the team came through Paul Parker being injured. David Beckham was tipped to be a centre midfielder, and everyone was like, well, he's going to play in the centre all the time, and he wants to play in the centre. But his chance came when Andrei Kanchelskis was injured and then sold, and they couldn't get Darren Anderton over the line. So those two players broke into the team in a position where they weren't naturally tipped to go in, and they probably formed the best right side in United history, which you strongly associate them with. So there's the opportunity which presents itself, how that comes about, because now you look at Rashford and you think, well, he's scored around 100 times for United, so he's definitely not been a failure. He's definitely a success of the youth system.
Yeah.
But this season has possibly proved for basically every player that plays for United that the step from where they were last season to wanting to challenge for the title is probably too great for them. That's no disgrace, and it doesn't mean that he's not a good player and that he hasn't been a good player for United. But possibly it justifies the idea that, well, when he's been great for United in the time that he's played, he's had some great seasons, he's scored tons of great goals, but maybe the idea that he was never going to be the player who would take United into a title-winning team, that's a justified opinion because of the fact, but justified by the fact that he wasn't tipped to be an obvious player who was going to break through at the time that he did, that the opportunity sort of presented it, and he took it and moved with it like that. And then there are the other examples, so Morrison and Pogba. Morrison didn't get in. Pogba's obviously become a player who you might say is world class, and you might say is a journeyman on another day. So all those kind of complex things. United have got so many areas where every youth player could break into the side right now. You wouldn't say, for example, Garnacho, you could play him on the left-hand side. Nobody's going to complain if anyone's dropped in that team to give these lads a chance. Nobody's going to complain if anyone's dropped to give Annabelle a chance. So the opportunities are there, and nobody could say that all of these players in this team have had, apart from Sancho, because he's just signed, and apart from Varane, but Varane's not going to get dropped for form at this moment in time. So apart from those couple of players, you're not really having a solid argument for anyone not being dropped. So those players should theoretically have a great chance to break in. You probably would have this case that you would need a player to be injured or a little bit of an injury crisis, like we did under Van Gaal, where a few of them broke through. The overall health of the youth system, though, is very good, and because it's been attended to. Like, under Van Gaal, obviously it was neglected a bit, and he was quite open with that. Oh, I'm not here for sorting out the youth system. I'm here to sort out the first team, and then we'll deal with that after. And then Mourinho used it as like the token thing where he was just putting players in, just like say that he'd continued doing it, and then he put like not seven, maybe 4 or 5 in the final home game before the Europa League, and then they were all sold within weeks. So, and they all did well as well. Harrop scored, didn't he? I remember in that game. So
that was a brilliant goal by Harrop, yeah.
So you didn't ever have this feeling, apart from McTominay, who was then used as threw him under the bus in the last few weeks as well. You never had this feeling for maybe 2 or 3 years that the youth system was being looked at properly. Then Solskjaer came in. I'm not saying that this was all Solskjaer's doing, but the work was obviously done behind the scenes to put the reinvestment in. They were looking at it properly. Nicky Butt was working really hard on that. They had a few people working hard on the recruitment. They identified some good players. We're seeing somewhat the rewards of that at the moment. It's very difficult when you look at the Youth Cup team and you see how well they're doing, because then you look at the Youth Cup teams that United have historically had, and it still took them 1 or 2 years after that to come through. Only Giggs is really the exception that came into the first team, and he was doing really well. So I know it's a long-winded way of looking at it, but I am optimistic about it, but I still don't think that... it seems like now's a good time to put them in, but at the same time, because of the natural way of development of young players, that maybe... I don't know. It's really that roll of the dice. What do you do? Do you risk losing the momentum?
I'm listening to what you're saying. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there's one thing that's a concern with our academy teams, though. Not the concern that it's the first youth cup final in 11 years, which is fantastic. I think the one key... I think the one thing that really testaments is when you look at certain teams, their academy teams and the first team all play the same football. Man City, like their academy teams all play the same possession, tiki-taka style football. It's always the same. So when they go into the first team, you know Guardiola doesn't need a lot of time. He just knows, right, I know what position you play in. Just keep it nice. Just quote unquote, just keep it simple, but just play the same game as the first team and it's fine. Liverpool, from their youth teams, obviously, if you watched the brilliant 5-5 derby last week, it's the same style. It's that heavy pressing style. As soon as you got to the first team, if they get a chance, whether it be 15 minutes or 20, or even if they get a 90, who knows, it's the same style of football. I think for United, from our under 18s or under 23s, our first team, they don't necessarily play the same style of football. And I think that's something they have to get right in the summer when if whoever goes into that role, whether it be Rangnick or whether it be Myrtle or whether it be Darren Fletcher and even the new manager, the one thing I hope in the summer is not just for first team football structure, but for the youth academy is, I think Neil Wood's done a fantastic job as a coach. I think you got to keep him in place, even in the under 18s as well. But they've got to play the same style of football. It's got to be like a transition where it's got to be smoother. You cannot just go from playing like defensive football in the under 18s to playing heavy, high press football in the under 23s to then playing relaxed in the first team. It's got to be the same style throughout. And I think that's something we've not had in a long time. I think that's something that we don't have. I don't know what you think on that.
Yeah, I would say one thing, you're right on historically as well, that goes back historically, because Liverpool, the players who used to play in the United youth team in the 70s and 80s would talk about how Liverpool's youth team and reserve team were basically like identical replicas of the first team, so much so that their centre forward would be 6'1" with a moustache and black hair. Do you know what I mean? They would say it's exactly the same as the first team player and stuff like that. Yeah, they were like almost like an academy of robots coming through. United has never so much been about. Well, it wasn't historically. True. I mean, people say 4-4-2 and they played wingers and stuff like that. Historically, United haven't ever been about a specific system or a style of play. It's always been about going out and expressing yourself and the quality of that individual and how that intermits with the team around it. Yeah. And sometimes when that happens, when you have a lack of quality in a specific age group, then unfortunately it drops the quality. There's no avoiding that. That's an inevitable point of the cyclical nature of football, that some players will be better than others. United are in a really good position at the moment where those players are really good, and it is because football players get into the team a lot younger these days. Do you risk losing some momentum by not putting them in? It's a very tricky situation.
I agree with you. Yeah.
When you're in this situation now with an interim manager who's, I mean, what's his risk? What's he trying to accomplish? Is he trying to get us into Champions League? Does it matter if he doesn't? Because he's not losing his job. The players aren't losing anything, really. So it's a very tricky thing, because I would say there's nothing to lose by throwing them in. I mean, I've seen us career out of Champions League groups, and I've seen it. I'm not bothered about it. If we're not competitive in it, there's no point really being that bothered about it. You've got to look at the development of the players. So give them the chance. Give them the chance to sort of energize the crowd, because anyone who's been to Old Trafford this season, as much as it's been great to go back and enjoy being at the game, it's been very disconcerting how disconnected the crowd is with the players, and sometimes you need those young players in the side to restore that connection. So it's very, very tricky one. I just think that really, in terms of the quality in the youth system, there's no problem at the moment. There's a lot of quality there. Certain things like you're talking about the sort of identity side of it. That's where the connection to the past comes in with the coaches that you've got. I know Ryan's obviously got that connection. That's why I'll always say it as long as he's not at the club. Paul McGuinness is a massive loss, because United needed to have him on a job for life, because he understands the historical context of everything, and he made such an impact in educating those younger players in a way that I'm not sure that the other staff do. And I'm not necessarily criticizing them for that. Sometimes maybe a fresh break is good, but McGuinness was so good at that I would have given him a job for life. It could have nothing to do with how good these young players are coming through, and also.
I think it's a good reflection. Yeah, I like that, because I think a good example is maybe Chelsea with Cobham. As you can see it, like Chelsea, obviously we know at the moment they are going through a few things at the minute. Whether you like it as a football fan or whether you don't, that's up to you. I personally don't care, because it's Chelsea. But you look at the Cobham links, and they consistently produce, just like us, they're consistently producing top talent that isn't just playing for their first team. They're playing for clubs that went and won like Champions Leagues and multiple league titles. They've had players that have went and like Jorginho. He's a good influence. He didn't come from Cobham, but he's a good influence on their academy midfield right now.
Yeah,
because they're playing a similar way. You would expect them to play like Kante. Aggressive, like in the midfield, but they're centered more towards Jorginho because he's passing ability, and they're trying to find more players like Jorginho because he's going to be hard to replace, just like Kante. I think that's a reflection on them, which is a good thing. And whereas for us, we're trying to find. We're not just trying to look for the next gem. We're trying to look for the next spine, which we haven't done, God forbid, since 1992. It's hard.
Yeah.
That's our biggest challenge: is can we find the next spine? Ideally, I hope so. But the one thing I don't want is I don't want a repeat of 2014 where it completely disappeared. We lost so much from that because it got, as you said, it got neglected, and I'm hoping that's not the case.
It capitulated, didn't it? It really did.
Massively.
I think for me, it's a bit of a double-edged sword on your point about playing the youth now. You know, our season is essentially over,
done,
and it would be a great opportunity to do that. And listen, these Ralph Ragnick, all the other coaches that are there are here to do that job, and hopefully, obviously, they allow those players to be instilled in the team as and when it's necessary. But I absolutely agree with you. I think it would be great to see some of those players. Victoria's Secret's here again. I've been really impressed, and Reece knows a lot about this guy. Alvaro
Can't stop talking about him.
He's been excellent. Obviously, we've had a bit of a left back issue. Sorry if I cut out a bit there. Had a bit of a left back issue at times this season. And it would be good for him to certainly come through. And I don't know what your thoughts is on him, or even you, Reece, yourself.
I love him. Like not in the overall sense, but as a player, like I love the combination we have on the left hand side and the right. I've said it on numerous shows before. Tellez, Shaw, Dalot, Wan-Bissaka. I don't care how many you sell, but I know, like, obviously Wayne did his show with Paul Parker last week. Brilliant watch on Talk of the Devils. I do recommend watching it. It was in his live chat, and I said I'd sell the 3 of them. I would sell 3 out of 4. I think I'd probably keep Tellez personally. I think he's still at least shown a bit more. He didn't have a particular. I know don't really talk about last night, but last night out of all the games he had this season was probably his poorest. But whereas the rest of them have been fairly inconsistent over the whole season, I think I would rather persist with him. I'd promote Alvaro Fernandez as his backup, And then it's more in the sense of the right back slot. I would sell Dallo and Wan-Bissaka.
Ethan Laird.
I would have him as a backup, but I like Jurado. I think it's toss of the coin. Who do you want, Laird or Jurado? I think Jurado needs a bit more time, which is great because then Laird can go in and you can just sign a starting right back to compete with. And obviously we mentioned Garnacho. I like Garnacho as a wing prospect. I think he's got great talent there. I'm massively pleased he's been called up to Argentina's first team. I think for somebody of his age, hasn't even played a first professional game, and he's already going to go play for his country. I'm genuinely proud for him. I think that's fantastic. And obviously Wayne's mentioned Charlie McNeil, phenomenal. Trevor in the comments has mentioned Joe Hugo, an age group below him.
Yeah.
Like that's two prospects at number 9 that you can compete against, and it's great. And I think there's other players that we haven't mentioned. Also, I know Keen's in the live chat. He's mentioned Hannibal. For me, I think he's fantastic. But I'm going to go ahead of him. And I'm going to say Zidane Iqbal. I love Hannibal, but I love Hannibal Buddy. But I think Zidane's the one. I think he's the one really. But we've got so many flourishing top players, as Wayne's already alluded to, that they're so great. But for me, I would sell Shaw and I'd promote Alvaro Fernandez in the summer. I would. I know it might sound too soon, but I like what I've seen. I've seen from him. I thought he was fantastic against Dortmund. Unlucky to lose in the Champions League, like the Youth League, and I thought he was fantastic again as well in the league games. Like, he's a consistent player. I was like, why not give him a chance? And I would personally, I would.
Yeah, I'd give all. You mentioned 6-7 names there, and all of them you give them chances before the end of the season because you've got to give them the introduction to sort of. I mean, you never know. Players can absolutely freeze and look like a different player with senior football. To give them that chance now.
Different kettle of fish, isn't it? Massive jump.
Yeah. So just give them that chance. The pressure's not really on. The fans will love those players immediately because there's something different, and it give them a chance to bond. And we'll just give them the chance because there's literally nothing to lose. We lost 5-0 at home to Liverpool this season. There's no ceiling. There's no floor lower than that. So just give them the chance, and give them the stage to do something because it is a tricky one. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Wayne? This is something I was thinking about the other day, and I think now's actually the perfect time to ask. Obviously, during the season, Tahith Chong went to Birmingham and he got unfortunately injured. He's now went back on loan to Birmingham. This is his fourth loan now. Do you? And I don't want to talk about just like binning young players because I don't like the idea. But do you think Tahith Chong personally has a chance at Man United? Obviously, this is his fourth loan. Do you think he has a chance, or do you think it'd be wise to find him a permanent place in the summer, like elsewhere?
He's definitely got talent. I like him. I do like him a lot. He played a couple of Europa League games, or at least one, and maybe even only half of one. I remember him playing at left back.
He did, yeah.
And he played really well at left back. And I was like, do you know what? That could be a different position for this guy because obviously he's very attacking, but you move an attacking player into a defensive position, and sometimes it doesn't matter how bad they are defending if they're that good attacking because you're giving the opponent so much of a problem. Like Alexander Arnold, do you know what I mean? It doesn't really matter how bad he is defending because he's so good going forward. And I was a bit disappointed that because at that time I think we were really struggling. And don't get me wrong, that was probably around the time Williams came in and did really well for that period. So swings and roundabouts on that one. With Chong, it's very, very difficult with a young player. And we'll talk about momentum earlier on and the value of having it and then losing it. There are not very many examples of players who go on loan and then come back, especially multiple loans. Everyone talks about Beckham, but that was a very short-term thing. It wasn't really an example of the loan system working. He went for a few games and then I think he was called back and Kanchelskis was injured and it just sort of...
He was in David Moyes, interestingly.
Yeah, David Moyes ragged his neck after he scored direct from a corner. He
didn't like it.
No.
I've seen it. There's actually an interview about that on YouTube. David Moyes actually asked about Beckham's corner, and obviously he would do it for the LA Galaxy in 2012. Of course, a Beckham fan knows that. That was a quality. But he was asked about that goal, and he was like, "Fantastic goal by the young lad tonight. Like, how do you think?" He's like, "That's not a goal." Like, that's not how you treat the opposition. Like, you do not score. You do not score from a corner. And I'm like, David Moyes, you might want to go and watch the Man United women's team. Like, there's like the captain's called Katie Zellum, and she's done it twice. Like, your thoughts? You'll probably have
recently, didn't she?
You'll probably have like a panic attack or a heart attack, like thinking like maybe I shouldn't have said those comments back in the 90s.
George Best once did it. There's a great story about George Best actually doing that, completely jumping subjects. But on the morning of a cup game at Wolves, George was practicing at the Cliff, and Jim Ryan went down to get comp tickets. He said, because Jim wasn't playing, he said, "Oh, can I have some tickets?" And George said, "Well, meet me at the Cliff and I'll give you mine." So he went to see him at the Cliff. George was practicing, and he saw him actually practicing scoring from corners. And he's like, "What are you doing, you silly bugger?" That night at Molineux, United are a couple of goals down. They get a corner. He sees George shaping up to take the corner, and he said, "There's no way," because he's shaping up in exactly the same way he did it that morning. And he did, and he scored from the corner. And United won. Anyway, we were talking about Chong and loans, right?
Yeah.
So two examples of loans that went well. There might be more, but Johnny Evans and Danny Welbeck did well at Sunderland. They came back and they played really well for us for a period of time. They contributed to title wins. For Chong, I think it'll be really difficult because that momentum, I think, has already gone. I want him to have a great career. I look at the momentum and I look at the pressure that's on United. I look at the next couple of years. I just don't see a way that he fits into it. Do you know what I mean? It's very difficult to see a way that he fits into it. Now, he can change that by being brilliant and undroppable, but I just don't see it. And that's not a reflection of him. Sometimes it might just be a reflection of his injury luck as well, because he's had a couple. I just think that ship sailed. And I don't want that. Sounds like I'm writing a player off, and I really hope that he comes back to prove me wrong with that.
I agree with you. It reminds me of because obviously the top, obviously you got the show that Keane does on a Friday, obviously with Phil and Lee, and obviously Phil had some horrible injuries himself, but that's another example. But another one is a player, funnily enough, he played with in the academy at times, and he went on loan to like Newcastle, and obviously he went abroad. Giuseppe Rossi.
Yeah,
it's another fantastic example to heave Chong is the Rossi situation was very unfortunate because he was brimmed to be one of the best Italian, not just Italian players, but best Italian strikers because of how good he was. He wasn't a typical Italian player as well. That's what I loved about him. But he was very unlucky with his injuries, and when he moved to the MLS, when he went over there, I don't think he got injured once. Not because of how bad the league is, because it's not. I think a lot of people sleep on the quality. It's that I think he finally learned about taking care of himself. I don't think he personally did in Europe. I know it might sound harsh to say, but I don't think he personally did take care of himself as well as when he went to America. I think he saw something change up here.
Yeah, maybe he was good for Villarreal as well. But he's he's a very good comparison. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great points, well made. And Trevor in agreement here. Tahith Chong has talent, but I'm not sure he's United level. But remember Harry Kane, he was on loan multiple times, and look at him now. And he also gives another example here. Lingard was also someone else on loan. Obviously, he hasn't hit the ground running all the time with United, but certainly has contributed in some big games, certainly. I've got one more question for you, Wayne, and I think we'll wrap up shortly if that's okay. Just wanted to emphasise this point up here, if I can find it. What a wonderful guest. It's certainly been a massive eye-opener for us today, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. So thank you so much for coming on.
So have I.
And we'd absolutely love to get you on again soon, for sure. So thank you so much. My last question, do you have any advice for people that aspire to write about their club, about its history, whether that's United or not, maybe not footballing at all, or even just how to write about your passion, whatever that might be?
The best advice is always to write about what you like writing about. If you find it interesting, it has to be the first step, because that if you find it interesting, you're writing for yourself in a way. You can learn how to write to make it interesting for someone else. But if you're not interested in the subject, if you don't have a passion for it, then it's just going to be a list of facts. If you can be interested in it, you can talk about why you're interested in it, then you're already halfway to writing a story about it, because you're writing about why it's important, even if it's only important to you. But even by doing that, you've broke down a little building block of the mechanics of writing. So there's that. I mean, the good thing is I'm writing about United history. United have got loads and loads and loads of history. There aren't, for some reason, I don't know, and I'm saying there aren't. I don't find that there are that many people who consume their club's history in the same way that we do at United. And most English football clubs have been around for nearly 100 years, and it doesn't really matter if the history is winning European Cups, because United have only won 3. Do you know what I mean? So that's only 3 years of European Cups to write about. What about, there must be, there's basically clubs of all fans of all clubs can write about the club's history, and it can be rich. The stories will still be entertaining, even if the stories that are entertaining on a local level, you're still going to have that aspect. Or stories that build up to the club playing in the FA Cup. Like say Yeovil Town would have giant killing days and stuff like that. There are always aspects of the club's history to sort of pick apart like that. But actually, doing it as a writer is always the idea of going back to what makes it interesting for you to do, because as long as it keeps it fun for you to do and makes it, you're interested to do it, then that's the best way of translating it. So I don't know. You mentioned the very first question you asked was about, your inspirations and stuff like that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I just write about what I want to write about, basically. And if I write about George Best, my wife kills me for this, because she tells me to read everything there is, and I do that. But what I actually, if I'm writing something on George Best, read everything about George Best, so you're completely consumed with that knowledge, more than I already did as a normal connoisseur of United. They just read everything, take everything in, and I do that. It's not that I don't do that, but what I do start off with is the idea. What makes me want to do it? And I never lose sight of that. Why am I doing this? What do I want to write about? Does it keep me entertained? And then I try and stay on that narrative for as long as possible. And that really, it transfers to any fan or any writer who wants to write about any club. You can do that, and you can do it at United, because there's still, I know I've written 20 books, but there's still hundreds of stories to be told on this. So, not just the ones that I've done. I just pick what I like. I don't think, I've got to do this because I did this. I don't always think that. But you write about what you want to write about. But I think that's fair to say of any discipline with writing, because once you start writing, if it's not of interest to you, then it's going to be a little laborious for the reader as well. It's like, he doesn't really care about it, so why should I?
And having that niche as well, obviously, I alluded to it earlier on when I said I don't think I could personally write about football, not because I don't like it or love football. I absolutely adore football. Like, I will die with a football, and it'll be in my grave. I don't care. Like, you can put a football in my coffin. But I think for many, it's a difficult niche to get into. Yeah, that's true. I think it's such a difficult niche to get into, and it's a different type of passion. And that's why for me, if I do writing as as I mentioned to you earlier on, as a hobby, I just like creative stuff. I like using the creative side of the art that I like to do. And funnily enough, that is football, but I do things differently. I don't think I could get into writing about football in that way, because the niche, and it's better suited to some than I would say myself. And that's completely acceptable, because it's it's that niche.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's my escapism anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love to write, so I'm lucky that is something that's a career for me as well, and just an indulgence. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you enjoy it, it doesn't matter what form it takes. Like you said, creating art or visual stuff, or if it's written, or even like we're venturing as a trio and with more of us together as audio visual kind of thing as well, which is a new medium to sort of put stuff out there as well. So yeah, it takes many different forms, and as long as you can, if you're engaged in what you're doing, then you're halfway to winning the battle, to making it interesting for someone else.
Absolutely.
Fantastic stuff. Just to read out a couple more comments before we wrap up. Great show, great guest. What more could I ask for? Outstanding as always. Thank you very much for that comment. Lovely to see. And there was one more, which I can't now find. But there you go. But listen, honestly, we've really appreciated this tonight, Wayne. Been fabulous stuff, and obviously the comments have been fantastic as well. Really great questions. So thank you very much. As I said earlier, Wayne Rooney, Teenage Kicks, a street footballer who ruled the world, and it is available on Amazon. I bought mine the other day, and I will be firmly reading that up until the end of the weekend and finishing it. So fantastic stuff. Wayne, where can we catch you on socials, Twitter, Talk of the Devils, that sort of thing?
Talk of the Devils is at Talk of the Devils, obviously, and on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Wayne S. Barton.
Fabulous stuff. Okay, well, anyway, as I said, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. Get some comments in after, like and subscribe, as I mentioned before. And we've got a few shows, more shows this week. Devil's Advocate, all the rest, and we'll see you next time.